Hello and welcome back to yet another edition of the On the Sideline podcast with Jackson and Kyle. I'm joined here by, of course, my co-host as always, now Raiders lover, Kyle. Kyle, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm happy to be a part of the official Las Vegas Raiders podcast on
Yes,
YouTube.
yes.
Yeah. So I got my golf fix in today with the little bit of the match play, and that was pretty awful to watch. And yeah, let's do this.
Yeah. So speaking of awful to watch, we have what hopefully will not be awful to watch today. We're gonna count down top 32 quarterback or not quarterbacks. We did it last week. Top 32 head coaches, which is going. I think it's gonna be a much more interesting one this time. I think just in the sense that there's so much variance where you could have these guys. I think with quarterbacks, for the most part, we had all of our guys in around the same spots. Here with head coaches, I mean, I think you could have a lot of different variants. There's a lot of different ways you could go here. And so I think this should be a pretty fun episode.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. There is I was kind of thinking that too, that we're going to have a lot more disagreements with this one.
Mhm.
It's like, how do you rate the guys who are, just strictly all around head coach guys compared to the guys who are maybe offensive or defensive specialists, compared to the guys who are like the team locker room personnel guys. And it's going to be interesting to see how we differ and how we agreed on some of these topics.
Yeah, definitely. And also just a little bit of housekeeping before we get too far into this. I have now it's set up so that we can have the On the Sideline podcast on several podcasting networks, including we have Spreaker, several others. I wanted to get it up beforehand, but I forgot to do that. But it's going to be on iTunes soon. We're just waiting for approval. So if there's a typical thing you listen to the podcast on and you'd rather listen to it there, check that out. It might be on there. Search On the Sideline podcast or just my name, Jackson Kruger. Some stuff only came up through that. So search either one of those and you can definitely find some stuff. Also, we had a worst take of the week last week. I'm trying to remember which one. I haven't got. I'm going to have to go back and check right now and see who had the worst take of the week, unless you remember who it was.
I didn't. There was a lot of disagreements on what the worst take of the week was. We had
Mhm.
some people weren't happy about Matt Ryan. Some people weren't happy about Aaron Rodgers and where I rated him. And
Mhm.
I do think there was some disagreements overall. I was a little surprised with the Rodgers slander overall, even though he's kind of
Mhm.
an. But overall, I would say that was probably the number one comment was Rodgers. That was
Uh,
most talked about. I think that and Dak were pretty close, actually.
all right. So, yeah. Here's what I'll do. I'll just find the closest one to the top, the highest voted, where someone is disagreeing. Well, we have someone says Daniel Jones is too low. That's on both of us, so we can't do that. Um, we'll just, we'll just sideline this one because there seems to be no real big one. So for next week, for this one, one of us will screw up probably. Make sure you vote down below who has the worst take of the week if you want to make one of us watch a video that we don't want to have to watch. Uh, and and so from that, I figured you got the first overall pick last time. I think only fair we reverse things. I get the first overall pick this time. Does that seem fair?
Yeah, that sounds good to me. So I'll take the evens on this one.
Yes, sounds good. And again, just to go over sort of the wording of how we're doing this, basically, it's going to be just who we think are the best head coaches right now. We're not taking previous success, although we kind of are, of course, because that's a great way to measure how good they are, but who we think will do the best job of coaching their team in 2020. That's the requirements. And the number one overall pick is obviously Bill Belichick. I mean, this is a no-brainer. You have to. The guy has 6 Super Bowls as a head coach, another 2 as an assistant. He's number one. Nothing else needs to be said.
Yeah, I mean, 16, 11 win seasons in 20 years is, you're not going to see a run of success in the NFL really like that ever again, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just pretty incredible to watch. I think that, he's a top 5 executive, I think, too, in terms of front office personnel, and
Mm-hmm.
was really ahead of the game when in terms of valuing players and, letting go guys 2 years too early rather than 2 years too late and no loyalty contracts. I think one thing that Belichick does especially well that people don't give him enough credit for, which is crazy to say Belichick doesn't get enough credit, is maximizing his personnel no matter who's on the field. You know, guys try and pigeonhole players into different roles, whether it suits them or not. He'll take a guy like Jamie Collins is the perfect example of someone who goes somewhere else and doesn't succeed, but he comes back to New England and he's still awesome once again because Belichick just works it to where he can use his speed and athleticism to New England's advantage without letting him get carried away. And then he has guys like Hightower who are so good at multiple different things that he can go through a lot of different things and allow a guy like Hightower to kind of take over games depending on the situation. So I agree. Belichick was number one on my list too. That's an obvious one.
Yeah, I think honestly the only argument you could even try to make against it is that since we're just judging the coaching ability, and that's also something I wanted to distinguish, is like not taking the GM into account, which is also another guy we're going to bring up later. I think that'll make a difference on him.
Yeah.
But I think that's the only argument you could try to make for him not being number one. But even that I think falls short. I think he's a clear cut number one. And I actually think that's the only one I would say is obvious. I'd like to see where you're going to go with number two. There's a few choices you can go here.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's kind of obvious, but it's also not because there are so many good coaches at the very top. I really felt like there was 5 at the top, and 2 through 5 were interchangeable, almost interchangeable to me. I went with Andy Reid at 2. He finally got his Super Bowl win, so I'm giving him credit. And he's the best offensive mind of this century in terms of long tenured coach. He's coached Donovan McNabb, Michael Vick, Alex Smith, and of course Mahomes came in and learned under him. But he's coached all 4 of those quarterbacks who are generational talent quarterbacks to their career years, or maybe not Smith in that regard, but the other 3 had some outstanding talent and they had career years under Andy Reid. So it's hard to make any argument against Andy Reid in my book. He still has the clock management issues, which I think is just going to plague him the rest of his career. But he got the reign, so you can't really complain about what he did now.
Yeah, I think he's lower if we did this last year. I think that fact that he finally got that Super Bowl, the monkey off his back, that really helps him. And Alex Smith was an MVP candidate under Reid the one year, so they definitely he's no doubt about it. Reid is one of the better coaches. I have him at number 3. I don't have him at number 2. I have someone else higher than him, and I guess we'll just get into that right now. My number 3, I have Mike Tomlin this high. I think Mike Tomlin is great. I know this is a controversial one. I know because there's people that think that Mike Tomlin is, with me, top 3 coach. There's people that think Mike Tomlin is, there was an argument that Mike Tomlin should have been fired by the Steelers because they kept losing to the Patriots. I'm interested to hear, what are your thoughts on Mike Tomlin and me having him this high?
So I had Mike Tomlin at 6. He actually wasn't in my 2 to 5 for interchangeable guys, even though I think he's the second most tenured coach in the NFL right now, I believe. And obviously he's done a lot of great things with the Steelers. And you have to give him the credit for, if that Steelers team makes the playoffs last year, which they were pretty darn close, I think they were a game out. I think if they make the playoffs, he's the shoo-in for coach of the year for how he was able to turn around that team, especially when, Ben got hurt. It just looked abysmal, and they took the risk with the trade for Minka Fitzpatrick and figured it out. At the same time, he also has, 3 playoff wins since 2011, and I feel like that matters. And I think the Super Bowl at this point is long in his past, and I just think that matters. He's got to get it done when it matters most, in my regard.
Yeah, and I think that's totally, listen, as a Tampa Bay Lightning fan, I am someone who is not a huge fan of John Cooper, despite having a ton of success. That being said, I do believe that I think that the lack of playoff success is by a lot of things that are outside of his control in several ways. Sometimes it is. I mean, he deserves some blame. Still has a .642 win percentage. That's 5th most in the NFL, but 2 guys ahead of him are Sean McVay and Matt LaFleur, who don't have too much experience. And then you have Sean Payton, Bill Belichick, and that's it. And I think the reason why I have him ahead of Sean Payton is because I think that, we'll get into that a little bit later when we talk about Sean Payton, but I think he's really good. And I think he, last year was certainly a feather in his cap, showing what he can do even with abysmal quarterback play.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I think he figured a lot of things out, and they talked about it a lot. It was very old school style coaching. He's getting back to the basics. Let's just get through this, and we're going to win these games ugly if we have to. And he was able to do that. And this was right after he had the best passing offense in the league the year before in terms of yardage with Big Ben. So he's able to be flexible and try and maximize the talent around him.
And I think maybe the biggest feather in his cap of seeing how insane Antonio Brown got after he left and realizing that he kept that guy under wraps for so long.
Yeah.
I definitely think Mike Tomlin's a very good coach, but I'm not going to hate on you if you have him a little bit lower. Again, I think that at the top, there's so many guys you could put here. Interested to see where you're going to go with number 4.
Yeah, I would. So, like I said, I felt 2 through 5 for me were a little interchangeable. I ended
Mm-hmm.
up having Sean Payton at 3. I thought it was really close between him and a couple other guys, which I'm sure we're going to talk to shortly.
Mm-hmm.
He's one of the winningest coaches of the decade, and a couple bounces his way, he probably has a Super Bowl in these past few years. Obviously, we don't need to go too deep into what's plagued the Saints in the playoffs the last few years. Obviously, they know all about that.
Mm-hmm.
He's developed Michael Thomas and Alvin Kamara, two of the best at their respective positions, and he maximizes what they do. Thomas in his route running and his tremendous hands. Kamara and being able to be that swing running back out into the flats, and also do a good job of being the speed back. And then also he's continued to be innovative as long as he's been a head coach. He carved out a brand new position for whatever it is you want to consider Taysom Hill,
Mm-hmm.
and he's just innovative. And overall, I would say, if I were to describe anyone as like a creative genius in the NFL, I'm probably going to go with Sean Payton in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually a little bit conflicted on Sean Payton. I have him at number 5, I have him a little bit lower than you, but I still think he's a top 5 head coach. It's what conflicts me about him is I do agree that like he's probably been the most innovative, offensive-minded coach, at least in my lifetime. I mean, he was the first guy with Drew Brees that would say, "Hey, we're going to check down a ton. We're going to do every play is going to gain." Like everyone says, you can't go broke making a profit, but I feel like they were the first team that like really took notice, like trying to make a 6-yard gain every play at least, which really helped them a lot early on. The Taysom Hill thing. He's been one of the more innovative head coaches. My problems with Sean Payton is I feel like he handled, and maybe this is just me putting too much blame on one problem, but I felt like he handled that the missed call against the Rams very poorly. I think that the mindset you should have as a head coach is we have to do whatever it takes to win. If a bad call goes against us, we still have to overcome it and we have to win. I don't think that you wear the Barstool Sports Roger Goodell clown shirt at a press conference. I don't think that you talk about how it was such a terrible such a terrible call. And I think you saw in that Minnesota Vikings game when there was a couple of calls that could have maybe gone their way. I didn't even think it was a poorly officiated game, but you saw, Taysom Hill was yelling at the refs after a big run and pretending, acting like they're adversaries. And I think that the mindset of the players was kind of, again, this is sort of not an X's and O's take. This is more of a leadership take. And I think that that'll be an interesting thing to talk about is how those are interchanged. But I do think sometimes he gets a bit too mouthy for his own good.
Yeah, I mean, I can't argue with that stance. I think it's very fair.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if it was something like, oh, we're going to galvanize the troops, and this is going to be our motivating factor for the season that they robbed us, and we're going to get back at them. Similar to the Patriots during the Deflategate thing. Belichick is not open about anything whatsoever, but
Mm-hmm.
you could easily tell on that march towards the Super Bowl that year that it was something that they took very seriously and they took personally, that they were attacked with the Deflategate scandal, and then use that as the force, especially Brady at that last 12 games of the season and then into the playoffs, as something that they were going to use as this is kind of an FU to the league. And I wonder if he was trying to do something like that. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure if I were in the same situation, I might wear a Roger Goodell shirt too, but
Right.
I'm also not a head coach in the
Mm-hmm.
NFL. So I can understand the point. I
Mm-hmm.
understand also why he might have done it, and I just don't think it worked in that regard for a motivating factor.
Yeah, I also do think the move is if you are going to do that, say we got, the NFL is out to get us, but also we had opportunities to win that game, which they did. I mean, they gave up a game time field goal in regulation. They had the ball in overtime. They turned it over and gave up a field goal in overtime. I also think that we have to mention the 3 straight 7-9 seasons with Sean Payton as well. I know that they had some bad contracts, but it hasn't been all perfect for Sean Payton. But again, he is still a very good coach. I have him in my top 5. And I'll move on to number 5 overall now for us. That's going to be John Harbaugh. I think John Harbaugh might have been a little bit lower if we did this 2 years ago. I think that what he's done with the Lamar Jackson of it all has definitely brought him back up into what is now the top 5. I think that it's one of the more creative just teams in general. I love how to have I love how both their offense and their defense operates. Of their offense, obviously the RPO thing, very smart. I mean, they got with the 32nd overall pick, they got an MVP. And then with their defense of just, we're going to play a lot of man coverage. We're going to blitz the hell out of you. And, I think it makes a lot of sense with everything they do.
Yeah, I actually had him at 5. I had one more coach ahead of him who we haven't got to yet, which I'll get to next.
Okay.
But Harbaugh, I think one of the great things about him is it always seems like he's willing to try something new and he's willing to try something different. And if it doesn't work, he'll just be like, okay, we'll go something else.
Mm-hmm.
I do feel like almost that a lot of like bringing Lamar in and doing that almost saved his job. Because
Mm-hmm.
if they didn't make the playoffs that year, I'm not sure Harbaugh's back in Baltimore. And I thought he did a good job, and obviously that was a huge risk bringing in the rookie at that point. But I do feel like it almost saved his job, and it was a great job of being able to bring him in mid-season and almost redesign an entire offense as it went along. So I can't
Mm-hmm.
hate the pick at all. Harbaugh really fixed that well, and he's proved himself as a really good coach.
Yeah, and if we gave the reigning MVP number 3 quarterback, I think it's fair to give the reigning Coach of the Year a top 5 spot here. Also, the one negative though, do you think that it hurts him that the main reason he won a Super Bowl was because he got carried by an elite quarterback?
Uh, yeah. I mean, when you have Flacco, it's so easy
Mm-hmm.
to
Yeah,
just coast to a Super Bowl.
yeah, huge break there, but is doing all right for himself after that. All right, let's move on to pick 6. Who do you got?
All right, so pick 6. I actually had Harbaugh at 5 because, like I
Mm-hmm.
said, I had Tomlin at 6. The guy I had at 4 was I still love the guy and love his approach, Doug Peterson. And
Okay.
even though the team's taking a step back to the Super Bowl, I
Mm-hmm.
just think he's a really smart football coach. I feel like the Eagles last season had one of the worst secondaries in football. They had one of the
Mm-hmm.
worst wide receiving cores in football. That like I feel like Greg Ward was one of their go-to options at one point last year, and he still won 9 games. I love the analytics approach that he takes to the game. I love the aggressiveness he coaches with. He's not afraid to go forward on 4th down no matter where he is. I just overall love what he does with the coaching position. And yeah, I really like him as a coach. He's one of the guys that if I were running a team and I needed to hire a head coach, he's probably towards the top of my list of one of the guys today that I'd hire.
Yeah, I like Doug Peterson a lot. I was very conflicted on Peterson. I had him at number 8, so I had him a little bit further down. And again, this is the fun thing about coaching. I think that it's, here's my concern with Peterson, I would say, is that I loved what he did. His 20, the year they won the Super Bowl, it was so incredible. Like they were the first team, I think, that were like, going on 4th downs is going to be always a question almost. We're almost never going to say, oh, we're just definitely punting. There's always that thought of maybe going for it. He coached that Super Bowl so aggressive. I mean, you saw that the contrast between him and McVay. Well, McVay was very conservative in the Super Bowl. That the following year, Peterson was so aggressive. The Philly special, all of that was so good. And I think that it also, him sort of inventing the RPO with a quarterback that isn't going to run the ball. That not really inventing, but really being the first guy I've seen to have that be a significant part of their team. All of that was really good. My only concern about Peterson is he someone who, was that his Orson Welles, Citizen Kane? And is it because all these, and now will he be able to continue to innovate in the future? Or is he kind of just where he's at now, where the rest of the league is caught up? Will he be able to keep going? That's why I had him a little bit lower.
Yeah, I can understand that. I do feel like the roster overall has kind of taken a step back since that Super
Mm-hmm.
Bowl, and obviously, they don't have a giant penis at the quarterback position all the time anymore,
Right.
and Carson Wentz carries a knock every now and then, which is a problem.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I just love the aggressiveness, and I think that you're gonna live by it and you're gonna die by it. They've lost some games that they probably should have won by being overly aggressive, but they
Mm-hmm.
also while that team was super talented that won the Super Bowl, I don't think that Nick Foles had any business beating the Patriots. But their aggressiveness paid off. They're at the front foot the entire game, and they won the game in that regard. So I think you live by it and you die by it. I would have
Mm-hmm.
a coach that isn't afraid to take those risks any day.
Definitely, and that's why I still have I'm at 8. I think he's great. I think that he had one of the best head coaching seasons ever. But I'm a little worried if he can duplicate it, which is only why I have a couple guys lower. one guy who I had higher was who's going to be number 7 overall now. He was number 6 on my board. That is Pete Carroll. I think Pete Carroll is still great. I think that the reality is you can say what you want about Pete Carroll, but you can't argue with his results. I mean, since he's been to Seattle, it's just been, especially with Russell Wilson, it's been winning season after winning season. I get all the complaints. I really do. I get the idea that people say that it's outdated. I get the idea that people say that they run the ball too much. At the end of the day, he still has the, 8th highest winning percentage out of coaches. There's 3 that aren't on the board, so 8 out of 29. But I think that he does so much well. He's one of the better head coach. In my opinion, he's still a top 6 head coach in the NFL, even if some of what he does is outdated.
Yeah, and I'm probably a little harsh on this one. I think one of the things you're going to see a lot with my rankings is that I like coaches who, like I said with Peterson, are aggressive, aren't afraid to change things, aren't afraid to be a little innovative and try new things. So I actually had him at 10. And like you said, you can't argue with the results, which is something that I always feel like with Carroll. He does get things done. He consistently has a great secondary. He has his defensive background. I just, I hate that he has the second best quarterback in football and he has an offense stuck in 1995. I can't stand it. Like if Russell Wilson was in a Greg Roman offense, there'd be a legitimate debate. He's the best coach in football or best quarterback in football.
Right.
Yeah, but yeah, and it's just so boring. They don't do anything exciting. They pound the ball up the middle multiple times a game, and then they hope Wilson bails them out eventually. I just don't get it. I'm not a big fan of his offense, and I'm going to knock him for it, even though it's probably unfair because he wins, over the majority of head coaches in the NFL today.
Yeah, I mean, they were a yard away from they were a yard away from winning back-to-back Super Bowls, but they were also a yard away last season from knocking the 49ers off and winning the West. It's one of those things where it is kind of hard for me to rate him because I do agree with all the criticism. Like I agree with all of them, but then he just wins and wins and wins, and he doesn't stop winning. So that's why I still have him this high. But I agree with the criticisms. Where'd you have him on your board?
I had him at 10. I did have him a little lower. Like I said, it was probably a little harsh, but I do think that if you have a guy like Wilson, you got to let him loose. And you got to let him do his thing. And yeah, but I mean, they still get the job done. I don't know if this team's going to go back to a Super Bowl anytime soon, but they're going to be a playoff contender every year. They're going to be right there, and they're going to be competitive. So,
all right, moving on to number 8 now. Who do you have?
Yeah, so number 8 is the guy I had at number 7. Like I said, I like aggressiveness. I like innovation. The guy who was probably the best offensive mind last season, the guy who made the Super Bowl, and Kyle Shanahan. He had one of the most dynamic offenses in football, and he did it with an average quarterback and 4 running backs who were pretty much journeyman running backs. And at points, they were just unstoppable despite all that. Obviously, they had Kittle, who's one of the best offensive weapons in the league. But I just think that a lot of the Super Bowl stuff is a little overblown on his part where, he's blowing these games. If Garoppolo hits Kittle on a third down play or hits Sanders deep, they probably win the Super Bowl, and nobody's complaining about that. And I really thought, I've gone back and watched that Patriots-Falcons game multiple times. Big shocker there. I really thought the only play that they should have run the ball was after that big Julio catch, because it turned out Hightower got a sack on the next play. It wasn't like it was a culmination of like 10 plays where they should have handed the ball off. It was just one play where Hightower came up with a big play. I still think he's one of the best offensive minds in the league, if not the best right now. And plus, he's one of the few coaches that can rock the snapback, which I think is just over the top. Puts him at number 7 for me, and he's number 8 in our rankings.
Yes, yes. I believe he's also the only head coach that wears Yeezys. So he's got a couple things going for him there. It's on one hand, it feels weird. He was number 7 on my board as well. So it's number 7 on both our boards, but ends up going number 8 due to other coaches going ahead of him. But on one hand, it is kind of weird that the number 8 head coach on our rankings doesn't even have a 500% winning percentage. But at the same time, I think it's totally reasonable to do that. I mean, you look at the quarterback play he's had for the large part of his time in San Francisco, and you'll very easily see why. I I'm actually, my next deep dive I'm going to work on, if you saw my Derek Carr one, I'm going to make one on Kyle Shanahan coming up. I've been working a lot on that. And one of the things I think I looked at with that was that last season when he had Nick Mullins as quarterback, I actually think that helped him a lot. I think that really helped him in terms of he had to really learn how to Jordan just used the running game a lot more. I think the running game got a lot more innovative that year than a lot of people realize. And so then for this season, he was able to have a more innovative running game along with Jimmy Garoppolo, and they were really able to thrive. I love Kyle Shanahan. I think this is a great pick here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you 1,000% with that one, honestly. Like, I think, I really like McVay, and obviously we're going to talk about McVay.
Mm-hmm.
I just think one of the things about Shanahan is he isn't afraid to change his scheme. The
Mm-hmm.
issue with McVay is you have to draft and build a roster to what he does well. Shanahan is essentially able to take any roster and make it work to what he needs to accomplish. And the offense, I feel like you could put him in any team right now, and that offense is going to end up top 16 in the league, top half.
Yeah, no, yeah, again, another thing going back to Shanahan, and because I've watched a lot of, by the way, it was so much fun going back and watching Shanahan's career because of all the crazy stuff that he was a part of. I mean, he dealt with he had the RG3 thing. He had some Johnny Football in there, Brian Hoyer, the Destroyer with the Browns. There's so much fun storylines that happen in that. So,
Wasn't
again,
he the Matt Schaub when Matt
yeah,
Schaub was like
yeah.
superstar? Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah, exactly.
So
Julio Jones had his best season with him. So, and obviously the historic Falcons team. So much fun stuff there. But let's go ahead and talk about the guy you just brought up. Number 9 for me is going to be McVay. We're going from the guy with the 22nd best win percentage in Shanahan to the second best win percentage in McVay, admittedly short sample size. But I mean, again, McVay is one of those guys where all he's done is win. He did go to a Super Bowl. Last year was definitely, I mean, again, this is another thing. If we're doing this last year, he's higher. Last year was definitely an X mark on his resume, I think. It was not a great time for him. That being said, they still went 9-7 despite losing an MVP candidate. So it was not a disaster by any means either.
yeah, I thought the whole that the Rams had been figured out thing was a little overblown.
Mm-hmm.
The Goff took a significant step back. Gurley had nothing left in the tank. And they dealt with some injuries on both sides of the ball last season, and they were still 9-7. So it was a
Mm-hmm.
solid team overall, and it was a solid season for McVay. I think he's underrated for how he is as a locker room guy and how he is to he seems like a pretty good motivator. Not to
Mm-hmm.
mention that he's just great offensive mind. The one knock you have against him is, well, it's easy to do that when you've had Wade Phillips on the other side, working the other side your whole career.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I'm not going to knock him when his offenses are consistently towards the top in the league.
Mm-hmm. And hey, part of being a head coach is bringing on a good defensive coordinator. So that, if you're an offensive mind. So definitely. Let's go ahead and move on to number 10. Number 10. Who do you got?
Yeah, so this guy I had at number 9 with Pete Carroll at 10. I'm probably a little higher than you are at this guy. I mean, we'll see what you have, but I have Sean McDermott. I'm pretty all in
Okay.
on this guy.
Mm-hmm.
The Bills had 0 playoff appearances this century until he
Mm-hmm.
came in, and
Yeah.
he's doing this now in the age of passing offense. He's succeeding with a quarterback who completes 58% of his passes,
Mm-hmm.
and he's the catalyst of one of the best defenses in football. Without any doubt, I do
Mm-hmm.
think that they could have, if you stack up the talent, obviously the numbers for New England last year were better, but if you stack up the talent on each position, it's not like you're. I think the Bills are right there as terms of the best defense in football. They only gave up 259 points last season. I think he's going to be in Buffalo for a long time, or at least as long as he wants to be.
Yeah, I like McDermott. I have him at number 11, so I'm just one spot lower on him, or I guess 2 spots, but well, 2 spots lower than you, 1 spot lower on the board. I like McDermott a lot. I think he's very good. I think that I was a little bit surprised that he actually has over a 500 win percentage too, because I feel like I sort of had this perception that he was, because the Bills have been bad for so long. I think a lot of people sort of haven't really been paying attention to him, but he didn't make the playoffs with Tyrod Taylor and Nathan Peterman for one game. I think the starting Nathan Peterman was definitely not a great move, but I'm not going to get too on him for that one.
Yeah.
And I do think that that it's like you said. I mean, he has a quarterback who isn't very good at throwing the football, and he has a running back who isn't fast or big. And yet they're still able to be successful. Singletary is good, but neither one of those two things. I think that definitely it's interesting. My one concern with McDermott, which I dropped him a little bit, is how he evaluates the quarterback position. Part of me feels like he needs to. I think he should have gone after Andy Dalton or should have gone after some sort of backup to have a, if you don't want to Blake Bortles yourself and put yourself in a bad situation. I do like what the Titans did. I think more teams should follow that. Maybe get a Jameis Winston, just get a second option in the quarterback room. I just feel like maybe that's something he should have, they could have done. But at the end of the day, they're going all in on Josh Allen, and I guess we'll have to see how it works out.
Yeah, I'm with you there that they could have addressed it. Andy Dalton's a tough one for me because I feel like a lot of what their passing game does is they use Allen's big arm to their advantage. John Brown's a great deep ball guy. Brady and Stephon Diggs, I think, is another great deep ball guy that really is going to help them. I don't know how Dalton necessarily fits into that if he's, asked to be a starter. That'd be something that they'd have to adjust.
Yeah, well, I mean, forget about Dalton, just a second option is sort of what I'm just using him as an example.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. I can agree with that. I mean, I actually think this would have been a nice spot for Winston to compete for a job too. So, I mean, I'm with you on that one, but overall, if he, at this point, if it doesn't work out for Allen this year, they're just going to draft a guy because their roster is just about filled out besides the quarterback.
Yeah, but that's kind of my concern. I think is just that I don't want to waste a year of a potential Super Bowl window. I would rather them have that opportunity now. But I do really like him as a head coach. That's just one concern I have about him. Moving on to number 11, I have him at number 10 on my board. I love this guy. I don't care what anyone says. This is the top 10 head coach in my book. Matt LaFleur is going here at number 11. I think that you could argue his leadership, whatever. His X's and O's is fantastic, I think. I loved what he did in that Seahawks game. I'm still going crazy over that fake pick play that they did to get a touchdown with Devontae Adams, I believe in the first quarter of that game. I'm a big Matt LaFleur guy.
So this was number 11?
Yeah, number 11.
Okay. I had Matt LaFleur at 16.
Okay. So we disagree greatly on this one.
Yeah, so I thought, he won 13 games last season, which you have to give him credit for in his first year. I thought he did a really good job of letting Mike Pettin run that defense. They had that great defensive line. I thought overall, I kind of felt like it was kind of middling sometimes on offense, especially for all the talent they had. I feel like, with Devontae Adams, with, Pro Football Focus's 6th ranked offensive line, with Aaron Rodgers and with Aaron Jones, that they should have manufactured more points. They ranked 15th in offense overall, despite having all those weapons. Statistically, they won 13-3, which was one of the best record. Actually, I think it was the best record in the league, or tied for it. They were statistically the 10th best team in football by DVOA standards. This was according to Football Outsiders. And there are 8-1 in one-score games, which I think points a lot more to luck generally than skill. I don't know. I watched a lot of the Packers games last year, and I just didn't understand some of the things they were doing. I felt like sometimes there was a lot of Jamal Williams when I felt like there shouldn't have been a lot of Jamal Williams. I think Aaron Jones is a legit top 5 running back. I think he's that good. And I just felt like there was a lot of Jamal Williams for obvious Jones situations, especially he actually is a pretty good receiver. But, I do think this team needed a refresh. Especially, I think things got stale with McCarthy, and they needed that refresh, and he came in and delivered that refresh. So I can understand the ranking. I want to see a little more of it and see the offense begin to mesh a little more before I rate him higher. So that's why I had him at 16.
I mean, I think those are all fair points, but I also think that comes down to it's the first year in running the offense. I think that, when you have a first-year head coach, you're not supposed to go 13-3 and make it to the NFC Championship game. You're supposed to just figure out the offense and be prepared for the following season. I think the fact that they were still figuring out parts of the offense and, we're still able to be relatively successful. I believe they were still top 10 in offensive DVOA, which makes more sense because they do run the ball a good amount. I mean, you could, I get the arguments. I get sometimes it would frustrate me. It's like, why don't you have Aaron Rodgers just throw the ball deep downfield more? But at the end of the day, I mean, if you don't want to take risk or not don't want to take risks, but if it's working, you gotta again, part of what I'm doing here is looking at the results. And I think going 13-3 as a rookie head coach, and I think that they still at times there were moments that I was very much wowed by LaFleur. I do agree with all your criticisms, but hey, he has the highest winning percentage out of any of these head coaches.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you can't fault 13 wins, so
Yeah,
that's where
exactly.
my argument's mute. But I
Hmm.
do want to see it a continual success before I rate
Uh-huh.
him a little higher, especially when I do have questions after his first year. But I can
Hmm.
understand it. I know a lot of people rate him highly, and he was obviously rated highly coming into Green Bay based
Hmm.
on his offensive skill set or offensive mindset. So I understand the pick overall, and I think it's fitting for where he is and where the team was.
Yeah, and I think honestly at this point too, we're getting to the point where everybody has a negative. There is no perfect coach, but I really like his I like he definitely is one of those guys. I like the X's and O's, but we can move on from there. Who do you got as the next pick? I believe it's number 12.
Yeah, this is the guy I had at 11 who I'm taking at 12 for our rankings.
Mm-hmm.
Very old school style. He is a guy with a negative, like we talked about, in the same division, Mike Zimmer, big time defensive guy. And I
Mm-hmm.
just feel like he's going to take any defense and be pretty darn good. And
Mm-hmm.
I just feel like consistently Minnesota is going to be right there in the
Uh-huh.
conversation as long as Mike Zimmer's around because he's just that old school mentality. That's just how the Vikings carry themselves. And I still like the team overall, and I like the pick for Zimmer there.
Yeah, I like Zimmer. I also had him at number 12. So, I had him at 12 and he goes 12 in the rankings. I hate making breakdowns when it comes to Mike Zimmer when I make the breakdowns of the Vikings defense because it is so complex. It takes like 10 watches to actually get what's going on because of how complicated it is. And he did the right thing of getting intelligent veterans in that secondary to be able to know what to do and know how to disguise these things. I would hate to be a quarterback going against a Vikings defense. And I definitely think that, you do have to look at the playoff disappointments. It is very on brand for the Vikings to have a head coach who does very well in the regular season, not so much in the playoffs. But I do think that that is probably the biggest negative so far about him, I would say.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. I just think
Mm-hmm.
he's going to figure a lot of things out.
Mm-hmm.
This Vikings offense is going to be the biggest question.
Mm-hmm.
Between him and Gary Kubiak, that's a very old school mentality in there. I thought
Mm-hmm.
Stefanski, um, I we're going to talk about Stefanski obviously with Cleveland, but I thought he did a lot of
Mm-hmm.
things right for that offense, and being able to adjust that team without Kubiak, I think is going to be a or with Kubiak is going to be a big thing.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I like Mike Zimmer. Again, I think 12 feels right for him around this area, just outside the top 10. I think that's where he belongs. The next guy, number 13, this is going to be the head coach for my favorite team, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Bruce Arians. Again, we're talking about someone with a definite flaw. I think his flaw is, you talk about guys who aren't willing to adjust. He's one of the few head coaches who does not have an analytics team. He's very much anti-analytics, which drives me crazy. He would throw the challenge flag on basically every pass interference, which also drove me crazy. But that being said, I think where he shines the most is his culture building and his ability to. I mean, I've watched this in Tampa Bay, and this is a team that doesn't accept losing. Where in the past, losing was all they knew. I think he's also done a great job of actually, we've seen young players getting better as the season has progressed. Part of that, I think, is Todd Bowles, but again, he gets some credit for bringing on Todd Bowles, I think. So having him here at 13, I think feels right.
Yeah, I mean he's been, two-time coach of the year winner, so
Mm-hmm.
you can't really knock the results for him. And I read a lot about Arians that it seemed like that he was kind of, taking it in the back seat a little bit and letting Leftwich and Bowles take a lot of control over things, which
Mm-hmm.
is fine because he does have two really good coordinators in his system.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then of course that team overall, like you said, it did seem that they were really galvanized and ready to play. If they cut their turnovers in half, they're probably a 9-10 win team rather than a 7-win team. And this is going to be the year for Arians to prove himself with that.
Yeah, I think so. And I also, one of the things I like about a head coach is one of the head coach will just say, you know what, I'm going to be the guy who builds the culture. I'll let the coordinator do the X's and O's a lot. Obviously, he helped with the offense. It was definitely, a Bruce Arians written by Byron Leftwich offense type thing. But
Yeah.
I do feel like I like what they've done in Tampa Bay, and I do think that he's the best head coach I've seen coach my team since John Gruden, and maybe even since longer than that.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. He's figuring some things out with that offense. And I think it's going to be fully unleashed, the full Bruce Arians experience this next season.
All right, moving on to number 14. Who do you got? I think it's going to get even more interesting as we get down here. A lot of different guys you can go here.
Yeah, so I'm at 13 in my rankings, obviously, because like I said, I had LaFleur a little behind. But
hmm
at 14, I'm taking Mike Vrabel. He led the Titans to the AFC Championship game. He made the
hmm
big decision to bring Tannehill in midway through that season. And, he kept it simple for Tannehill, and it proved to be the right move. He turned the defense into a, pretty darn good group. Oh, let me look up the ranking here. I had it somewhere, and I forgot to write it down. Uh,
I can fill some time if you need me to. Yeah, I like
they're
Mike.
top half of the league. They're at
Okay,
16. But
got
sorry. Yeah, so
you good.
I think overall, he figured some things out. And obviously with Derrick Henry, changing that offense to where we're just going to pound, pound, pound Derrick Henry, play action. A.J. Brown's going to be open every time because of his speed. It really
hmm
started to work out. And Tannehill was the perfect quarterback for that situation. So it was a good move by Vrabel, and it, turned the team around and probably saved his job almost. He probably had another year in him, but it would have put him on the hot seat at least.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the Titans are destined to go 9-7 every season, so I'm sure they would have figured something out. But I do think that, yeah, I think he's another guy similar to what we were talking about with Arians to some degree, of like someone who just builds a culture a lot of the ways. And I think that the culture he's built has been very good, and he has kind of let other guys take over the X's and O's to some degree, and he can be more of a, he can do the macro, let other people do the micro thing, which I think is smart. I think unlike Bruce, Bruce Arians has a 636 win percentage, which is the sixth highest in the NFL. His is significantly lower at 9-7 every year. But
Yeah.
he definitely, I do feel like part of the I had him at number 18. Part of the reason why I was going to have him a little higher, I moved him down, was because I figured I'm kind of overrating two games. And while those two games were great, the two playoff games, I don't want to put too much emphasis on just those two football games. I did think that he was very good against in both of those games, but I also think that he had some good matchups in both of those games as well. But I do like Vrabel. I think that he is very good. I just again, it's more of a, I wonder how, maybe it's just, I feel like, again, the culture is very good, but I feel like I just haven't seen enough yet. I've only seen him do it for two games. I want to see him do another season. I want to see how these things go before I'm going to really put him in the top half of head coaches.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I do have them at 13 now for what they were able to do at the end of the season and that second half
Mm-hmm.
of the season. But I could this could just as easily turn into next season. We're back doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And he's all the way down at 22, 23 because
Yeah.
the team goes 7-9. And,
Mm-hmm.
the offense that they had last season that began to work with Tannehill, regresses back to the mean a little bit. And it just doesn't work overall from that kind of standpoint. So I could very easily just see it falling back to that. But I do think that overall he seems like a pretty good motivator. And like you said, bringing in that culture to the Titans program just seems to really work.
Yeah, I agree. And well, we will, I guess, move. Wait, so yeah, let's move on now to number 15. That is my pick. This one's gonna be another controversial one. I think. I think this one's gonna be one that's gonna surprise some people. Another guy with a below 500 win percentage, and a guy who only had one season. I'm going Vic Fangio here at number 15. I know this is going to surprise some people, but I like Fangio. I think people did not pay enough attention to the Denver Broncos. They were probably the most unlucky team last year in terms. I think they were a much better team than their record would show. And I think that what he's done as a defensive coordinator, clearly he knows what he's doing in that regard. He probably was the most accomplished guy to not have a head coaching job before he got the head coaching job. And I think that what he's doing in Denver works. I think Denver is going to be very good next year. And I like Vic Fangio enough to put him in the top 15, even though he's only had one season and it didn't go that well.
Okay, so I had him a lot lower. Let me
Mm-hmm.
start this conversation by saying that a lot of the first year head coaches or the new coming head coaches coming in, guys with 1 year experience, or I had a little lower. I feel
Mm-hmm.
like I wanted to see more of a prove it in year two or
Mm-hmm.
in their first year before I rated them any higher. I do have a couple guys higher on my list. I had Matt LaFleur 16. I had Brian Flores a little higher too, who we'll talk about later. I had
Mm-hmm.
Vic Fangio at 24.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm.
It started off really slow, but then Fangio, he turned the defense into exactly what it was hyped to be. You know,
Uh-huh.
they ranked top half in the league. I think, let's see, I have it 13th in DVOA, 10th in points allowed, and they're among top half of the league in quarterback hurries, being able to get some pressure on the quarterbacks. I think the downfall for this defense was the lack of turnovers they were able to create and the inability to sack the quarterback or make any big plays. They were just solid. They didn't make anything like huge happen. And I just feel like it was a conservative approach on both sides of the ball. Because obviously we both have talked about multiple times that we really like what we saw from Drew Lock. And we
Mm-hmm.
think this Broncos offense next season can take a huge step forward because they have two solid running backs. They have some solid receivers and then we liked what we saw from Drew Lock. I just think some of the training wheels have to be taken off. I think that they have to play a little more aggressive. They can't be afraid to throw the ball downfield. They have to give this guy a chance to prove that he is the guy at quarterback. And I think that he's one of the guys that I think could actually climb way up the list because I do think the Broncos are kind of primed to be the second best team in the AFC West next year. So I like the pick overall. I had him a little lower because I wanted to see some more, but I can't hate. I can't hate for saying it because he proved that he's a defensive guy, and every defense that he has is going to be rock solid. They're not going to give up a lot of points, and that's what he does.
Yeah, and I think part of it too is they had obviously that rough start, but I think some things really went their way. I think the Bears game especially that was there was a lot that went against them on that one. I think that losing Bradley Chubb hurts a ton. He only played 3 games last year. He only played 3 full games last year, so that was a huge detriment
Yeah,
to that. And even with that, they were still able to have a very successful defense once things got going. I think that as the season progressed, they got better and better. And that's kind of what I look for in a head coach is sort of, especially first year head coach, is where are we at the last 4 or 5 games of the season, not so much where are we at the first 4 or 5 games. Uh, I'm very high on him. I really like him. This could totally end up being, I made a top 10 worst takes of the year that I'd made for the first season. I could totally see this ending up in the top 10 worst takes of next season, but I really like him. I think he's going to be great. I also predicted that he was going to be the best rookie head coach of last year. That did not work out, but I'm just going to ride this hype train until it falls off.
Yeah, I mean, I can't hate the pick. Like I said, solid
Mm-hmm.
defensive guy, you know,
Uh,
and I actually really like the pieces that they added on defense too. I really like AJ Bouye, so I can't hate the pick in that regard. I think the Broncos are going to take a leap forward, and I think he will climb up my rankings in that regard because
mhm.
I do think that this is probably a wild card team.
Yeah, and it's totally fair to say I need to see another year. So we'll move on to number 15. This is definitely gonna be a long one for this podcast. Who do you or number not number? Where are we at? What number are we at? 16?
16, yeah,
16,
I'm the
yeah.
even.
Right.
So this is the guy I had at 15. Uh, I, I'm going with John Gruden.
Okay.
This last Super Bowl
Again,
winning. Yeah, I know.
big Raiders fan.
Oh my gosh, top half of the league. I had him at
Uh,
15. The
uh,
last Super Bowl winning head coach on my list. Obviously, that was
mhm,
back in 2002, so it's different.
right. Hmm.
It was hardly even NFL at that point.
Well, no, there's
Um,
still one more. There's still
oh,
Mike McCarthy is
that's
also,
right. My
yeah.
bad.
Right.
So I
It's
forgot about
okay.
him almost.
Yeah,
He's
it's okay.
forgettable.
Well,
So anyway,
he did it with a different team, so it makes sense. And so did Gruden. But yeah, go ahead.
um, you know, he's I think he's done a good job of bringing in the culture at Oakland and now going into Vegas. I think a
Hmm.
lot of what he's done made sense. They've kind of been on a rebuilding path so far with what they've done in that team. He's brought in the locker room guys, and I think he actually handled the Brown situation pretty well, given a lot of the issues, and that was kind of outside of his control for a lot of it. I think the next 2 years is when Raiders fans are going to start seeing results, though, in terms of what Gruden's produced.
Hmm.
I've said before on this, even when they were 6-4 and battling for that playoff spot, I didn't think this team had enough talent. They ended up with a minus 106 point differential, which ranked them at probably around sixth worst in the league, which was probably appropriate for the talent level.
Hmm.
And they've addressed that. They've addressed a lot of their issues. I think I mentioned it before. They've addressed a lot of the holes that they had across their roster. I thought they had the worst linebacking core in football, and they addressed it. I thought Nick Kwiatkowski is a solid get as well.
Hmm.
I still feel like this team still feels like a year away for me, because so many of their offensive weapons are and guys who they're relying on to be big time players are still so young. You know, the running back Jacobs is still going in his second year. All the wide receivers they brought in are going to be rookies. So this team still feels like a year away, but I think Raiders fans are going to start wanting to see some results from this team as the talent is getting better. They have some pieces around them, and they got to start scoring some points. Is really it.
Yeah, I mean, without a doubt, I think that this is a very interesting. Gruden was number 15 on my ranking as well, so we both had him at the same 15. He falls to 16 though on the draft. Uh, I think that he's such an interesting coach for sure. I do think that they're going to have to be effective next year. I think they are going to be though. I think this is the playoff team. It doesn't mean they'll make the playoffs, but I think this is the playoff level team with the talent. And I do feel like it's kind of hard to really see totally what Gruden does. Because on one hand, you could argue that, well, the sort of we're just going to play every three downs to get a first down is kind of outdated. It doesn't really work out too well. You can get turnovers. You want to be able to get those chunk plays because turnovers do happen. But at the same time, I feel like they haven't had the differential. They haven't had the talent to not do that. That's kind of been what he's had to do, just with what he's had around him in terms of lack of really too many deep threats. Also, one thing worth noting with Gruden is that if the Raiders go 6-10, then Gruden is going to be at a 500 record, which kind of is crazy considering how well he started his career. Definitely has
Yeah.
had some down years in Tampa and then really in Oakland when they bottomed out the first year. Really tough, but I mean, obviously, I'm a Gruden fan. He won my team a Super Bowl. I'm gonna be a Gruden fan forever. But yeah, it's interesting that I couldn't have him too high, just because I still feel like he's just kind of been unproven in his return.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, this was a rebuild job. This was from the ground up. I didn't
Hmm.
expect much from this Raiders team this past couple of years, and you can say almost with their record last season that they overshot probably their expectations.
Hmm.
I still thought that team, like I said, was barren for talent, and he
Yeah.
was able to, they're able to get some wins that they probably shouldn't have won.
Hmm.
But like I said, he's brought in a really good culture. It's been a real change of pace from what the Raiders have been in the past, especially when you look at this century, what they've been in the past 10 years or so. He's brought in a good culture, and I think it's building towards something. And I see the vision that him and Mayock have as they're building towards a playoff team. It's just getting there, and the end result is what's next.
Yeah, I agree. I'm yeah. Uh, Again, I've talked so much about Gruden. I won't continue talking too much more about him. Number 17 here, number 16 on my board. Uh, I am gonna go with someone who, again, this is kind of someone who had a tough time totally ranking. He's right in the middle of the win percentage. He has a 546 win percentage, which is 15th in the NFL currently. I'm going with the Washington Redskins new head coach Ron Rivera. He got fired. It was kind of a weird firing. I think that in some ways we've seen that his base cover three zone defense can have its flaws, but also if it has the talent, it can be very effective. As we saw in 2015, we saw what he did with Josh Norman, really coaching him very well, and we saw Norman really had a breakout year that one year in his contract year with Carolina. He's someone who I do think is a very good defensive minded coach. And I think that he is someone that can also build a culture. So just outside the top half of coaches, but he's definitely right there. And I could easily see him taking a big jump in either direction next season, which is kind of why I have him here.
Yeah, I had him at 19. I had him a little lower than you, but I understand
Mm-hmm.
it. I do think Washington was a team who kind of needed that adult in the room to
Mm-hmm.
figure some things out. Especially, the Dan Snyder era has just been so all over the
Yeah.
place
Uh,
that they kind of just needed someone to like be normal. And I feel like
mm-hmm.
Ron Rivera is going to be that
Yeah.
guy.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know, like I think it's going to be a solid defense overall, especially, he's going to coach up that pass rush. And I think that's going to be a really good pass rush this next season. Um, Offensively is where they're going to have to put a lot of work into. We both obviously ranked Dwayne Haskins last season or in our quarterback rankings.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so they're going to have to work on some things there and try some different things to see if they can maximize Haskins' talent. Um, I do think that they're eventually going to get a quarterback in the future years. But I guess in terms of 2020, I don't see the Redskins taking a step forward. But I do see
Mm-hmm.
Rivera kind of steadying things as he starts to figure things out and build the roster he wants.
Yeah, hard to become more of a mess than what they were last season. So I guess nowhere to go but up. Maybe that's part of why he took that job. Who do you have at number 17?
All right, number 17, this guy, I think I haven't read it. 17 is Frank Reich.
Okay.
This was kind of a weird one for me to gauge because I honestly like I was thinking about it. I don't remember a time where I've ever actually heard Frank Reich talk. Um, but I think he's managed to adjust his offense in two successive seasons, and each
Mhm.
time he's been largely successful, even given some adversity. Obviously, what he had to deal with last year in Indianapolis with the whole
Yeah.
luck situation,
Mhm.
retiring, all the injuries. It's like that offense was like just so barren at some points. And he turned it around. They ran the ball really well, and they battled, even though a lot of that team was just not up to par for an NFL team, especially the top half of that AFC South was pretty competitive, and trying to battle through Tennessee and Houston was tough given that roster. And I just think he seems really smart, really ahead of the curve. And I think he's going to figure some things out in Indianapolis. And if he can limit Philip Rivers' turnover, I do think that they're going to be pretty good next season.
Yeah, big if, but yeah, if the, I have Frank Reich at 20, and it feels way too low. But I couldn't justify putting him ahead of anyone who I had below him. I do like Frank Reich, and I think that it's worth mentioning if I'm gonna put Mike Tomlin at number two, largely because of what he was able to do with not having great quarterback play. I mean, Brissett's obviously a much better quarterback, but he had the situation where he had his Pro Bowl level quarterback retired right before the season started, didn't have time to prepare. They said, okay, you know what, Brissett, you're going to be the guy. And Brissett played pretty well, and he was able to, they were able to have some success. I Eventually they did fall off. I think people might be a bit too high on the Colts this year, but I do think that there was a lot he did well. I have him at 20. I'm not mad at you for having him higher.
Yeah, I think the Colts they're going to be pretty interesting to see. They were the fastest paced offense 2 years ago when Luck was still there, and then they moved to one of the slower paced teams for obvious reasons, given Brissett, and obviously needing to run the ball more and more. And I do feel like he's another one of those guys that one of the things I really like is he's able to adjust to whatever his roster is and kind of maximize his talent in that sort of regard.
Yeah. So okay. Number 19 is going to be my most
19.
controversial one. This one is the one that people are. I think people are going to call me crazy for this one, but I don't care. I think this is the correct spot for him. I said earlier, I'm going to make a very clear distinction between general managers and head coaches. I think Bill O'Brien is who I'm going to pick here at number 19. I have a number 17 on my board. I think Bill O'Brien is a very underrated head coach. I think that as a general manager, he made one of the worst trades in NFL history. But I think as a head coach, again, if you want to look at results, 5 out of the 6 seasons he's been a head coach, they've had a winning season. He went to the playoffs and won a playoff game with Brock Osweiler as a quarterback. Yes, you can nitpick his going for it and not going for it against the Chiefs, but I didn't disagree with either of those calls at the time. I think that's a bit of revision, a bit of hindsight is 2020 there. I think that Bill O'Brien is a fine head coach. I think that he's been given too much power in Houston, but I do think that if he had a good general manager, I think things could be going a lot better for Houston.
Yeah, I had him a little lower. I had him at 23. I do
Mm-hmm.
think that in terms of the longer tenure head coaches, I'm not the biggest fan of his. I don't think he's the worst or anything in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
He's won 4 division titles in 6 years. So
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
how you can't
Mm-hmm.
really knock the results. I think it's pretty crazy. Like in his
Mm-hmm.
96 game career with Houston, they have a point differential of plus 23.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, like, you watch some of his individual games, I feel like his playoff game against the Bills, that's going to be taught at a clinic for how not to coach a football team. And then
Mm-hmm.
obviously, I do think that a lot of it is he blew that huge lead against Houston or Kansas City, sorry, which
Mm-hmm.
people do knock him for, obviously. I think
Mm-hmm.
he's had a number of stars on both sides of the ball during his tenure, which has helped him tremendously. But I do kind of throw up a shrug with him. It's like I don't like a lot of the things he does, and I watch a lot of Texans games, and I don't understand a lot of what he does, but then it works, and then they win
Yeah.
games, and they
Mm-hmm.
continue to win games. And I think a guy like Watson obviously helps that, but he also has, some subpar running backs every now and then, and he makes them work, and he has a good running game. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't hate the pick with O'Brien a little higher than what I had him.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the point differential part of why it goes a lot further down is because of that the one year that didn't have a winning season, they went, I believe, it's 4-12. So, definitely, he's right in the middle. 16th best winning percentage. To me, him being a middle of the pack head coach feels right for me.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's probably the benchmark for where you kind of need to be coaching wise to at least stay
Yeah.
in the league for a little bit of time.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that he does some things well too. I think the RPOs with Watson definitely have worked, and I think that the way that I think he's done some things pretty well. Definitely some criticisms. I think his game management might be worse than actually his X's and O's and things like that. But I like him, or at least I think he's fine. I think he gets. I think he's underrated, I guess, as I would say. But anyways, let's move on to number 20 on the board. Who do you got?
Yeah, so this guy was actually 17 on my board, and I just think for what he was able to do in year one, given the roster he had, I'm going with Brian Flores. This team
Okay.
took everything out of its cupboard in
Hmm.
2019, and the roster was one of the worst in recent memory. The front office was in full tank mode, and Flores
Hmm.
just kind of said "f that," and he went into it. And this team winning 5 games after their start to the year, I thought was a miracle. They were 500 in the second half of the season. And
Hmm.
they even beat the Pats the final week of the season to move them to the 3 seed and ended the Patriots dynasty. This team played with a lot of fight for a bad team. He figured a lot of things out. I think he adjusted really well as the season went along. And despite all of that, and they weren't able to tank as they wanted to because they won 5 games, they still got Tua, who they wanted all along. And he's lower on my list because I can't rank a guy in the top 15 who's won 5 games in his coaching career. But I think he battled in his team. He brought a lot of fight to that Dolphins team, and now he's going to go into the season with one of the most expensive secondaries in football. And I think this team's going to be fairly competitive. They're going to fight every week, and I like Flores. I'm really in on him.
I do like Flores as well. He's a little bit lower. He goes 20 here. I had him at number 22 on my board. Part of why I'm a little bit lower is because I'm still like I have to see more. It's one thing to turn a 2-win team into a 5-win team. It's a lot more difficult to turn an 8-win team into an 11-win team. And I do worry. I think about Todd Bowles, for example, when he had a couple of 5-11 seasons of the Jets, and it was impressive. Of like, wow, they have no talent, and he was able to win them some games that they shouldn't have won. And then it just kind of turned out, oh, that's kind of all he can do as a head coach is, turn a terrible team into a bad team. And while that is impressive, at the end of the day, the goal is to win a Super Bowl. I'm not saying he can't do it. I'm just saying I have to see it first. But I do like what he did his rookie season as a head coach. And I am pretty high on Flores.
Yeah, I think the division's going to open up a little bit this next season for him. I don't think this team's anywhere close to like
Mm-hmm.
being really competitive, but
Yeah.
I do think that they're going in the right direction. And I think they have a guy who, at the very least is going to get his team to compete. They're going to wake up every Sunday ready to go.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. We'll go on to number 21 here. We've had quite a lot of variance. I feel like most of your picks are right around where I have them, but a couple of my picks have been definitely very far off from what you've had. This one, we're getting back to normal, I think. I'm going to have Anthony Lynn here at number 21. He's had 3 seasons. They went 9-7, 12-4, and then they went 5-11. I think that obviously the 12-4 season was very good. This most recent 5-11 season, not so good. The Chargers, they lost. It's amazing how many games they lost. By seemingly, acts of God Himself coming down and causing them to lose games. I believe. Let's see if I was trying to look at their point differential. They gave up 8 more points. The point differential was -8, despite the fact that they were 5-11, which is just bonkers to think about. The fact that they had that many more, 6 more losses, but still a point differential -8. I think that they were definitely one of the more unlucky teams last year. I think turnovers definitely went against them. Part of that was Rivers. I think that he's very good. Again, last part of I think why you lose those late games is because of bad coaching. I think you actually said something where close games can often be luck. I think that it can be, but I also think part of it can be coaching. And I think that
Yeah.
can factor in. And so that's kind of why I have him lower. But I think he's good. And I think now that Rivers is gone, he can kind of try to run the offense that he probably has wanted to try to run since being a head coach.
Yeah, I mean, he's a running backs guy. He is also
Mm-hmm.
well known as kind of the locker room guy. It seems
Mm-hmm.
like a lot of his players like him. This is the first time the Chargers are going to have a new quarterback since 2005. So there's going to be some changes to an organization that really doesn't like a lot of change besides going from a loyal fan base to a non-existent fan base.
Uh-huh.
They don't really change much overall.
Right.
Um, I think I think he's fine. He's another one of those guys that I feel like is kind of one of those benchmark guys. I
Mm-hmm.
I don't think this Chargers team I do think, like I said, I've said it before too. I feel like this team was better than where they were last year, and obviously,
Mhm.
I kind of think he gets a mulligan from last year, just based on all the injuries that they were dealing with.
Uh-huh.
Especially, that defense was supposed to be really rock solid, and it
Mhm.
was just injury after injury every week. And then, Philip Rivers fell off that Max Kellerman cliff last season,
Mhm.
and I do feel like he kind of gets a mulligan in that regard. Um, and but he's got to start producing some more results. He's got to get back to what he was doing. He had successful seasons his first 3 seasons. This is his fifth year coming up, I believe. Three
Okay,
or
maybe
four
that was it.
seasons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
One of those. But yeah, he has to get back to his consistent results and his winning ways coming up here. Um, Obviously, he can't continue to go 5-11 and hope to keep the job.
Yeah, no. It's, according to Pro Football Reference, this is his third full season. He also had one game with the Buffalo Bills, but that could be wrong. That's what I used for my statistics. But
No, I think
um,
you're right. So
okay. But yeah. Anyways, but yeah. I mean, again, I'm not crazy about him. He is someone. He's one of those guys who he could find a way to break up into the top 10. He could find a way to be out of the league by next season. A lot of different ways that can go. Who do you have as your next pick?
all right, I'm gonna go with Mike McCarthy here.
Okay.
Where are we at here? This
This
is
is
20,
22.
22. Yeah, I had him at
Yeah.
20.
Okay.
I think McCarthy, I think anything from Jason Garrett is going to be a step up. And I
Mm-hmm.
think McCarthy is going to be the experienced guy who can go in and kind of, figure some things out. Um, he said that the year away allowed him to learn from a lot of what he did wrong. I thought,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that he was necessarily a bad coach ever at Green Bay. I just think things got really stale. At least that was my opinion on it. And I think that they needed to change. They needed to re up a lot of that stuff. And I think that for a long time, I guess the negative you say is that he didn't want to change anything for so long, even though when it
Mm-hmm.
just wasn't working at points. But I think, I kind of buy into what he's saying, that he's gonna learn from what he did wrong, and he's gonna keep this offense innovative. And I think that this could be a pretty good Cowboy season. He's got a lot of pieces on that offensive side that he can work with.
Yeah, I could see this going several different ways. I could see this being his Andy Reid to Kansas City moment where, things, I mean, for McCarthy, like the last memory we have of him is him losing to the worst team in football, the Arizona Cardinals that year, and then getting fired, not even the next day, getting fired that night. Uh, that's the last memory we have of him. So that was definitely not very good. On the other hand, this guy has a over 600 win percentage. So, his career stuff has been very good. He's won a Super Bowl, but it's been so long since we've seen that happen. And I think that some of the negatives, you want to talk about conservative. The NFC Championship game against the Seahawks was one of the most coaching not to lose scenarios you will ever see. And I just think that there was a lot that went wrong for I think that he did a lot of things wrong, especially the game management. And I wasn't that impressed X's and O's too. I think that he might have innovated early on in his career, but I think especially the last season, it really felt like he was, I think Brett Coleman said in a video during his last season, it felt like it was like a like someone playing Madden and just doing Ask Madden and just randomly selecting plays sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I'm kind of with you on that. It did get really conservative at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, I think it can get better. I think that if he does change it, get back to, if he goes back to 2010 McCarthy, which we all really liked, then this can go
Mm-hmm.
really well. I could also see this lasting 2 years, and then they're on to a new coach already, because
Yeah.
this team just didn't get better.
Mm-hmm.
Dak moves on and he signs a contract elsewhere because he didn't get better, and he even possibly takes a step back this next season. But if we're getting 2010 Mike McCarthy, I think this Cowboys team can be pretty good.
Right. And I mean, again, like that's he kind of one of those wild cards. I have him at number 25, but I can definitely, see the argument for him being higher. He's just such a wild card because we haven't seen him coach last season and we don't know how much better he's going to get. It's kind of similar to when Gruden came back where it's like just a complete wild card, and it's interesting to see what he's going to do. Obviously, that was one season, not like 10, but I think it's very interesting. Moving on to number 23, I'm going with another guy who is quite the wild card. I'm going Matt Nagy here. I do think that Nagy, I'm so conflicted on him because again, you want to talk about, I criticize Peyton for being the kind of guy who is like, well, if this one thing went differently, we would have, won the Super Bowl. Well, I think Nagy did that to a much higher extreme where I felt like he blamed the entire, playoff loss on Cody Parkey and on the missed field goal by Cody Parkey. And really, you can't do that. I don't think you can't blame an entire game on a missed field goal when so much went wrong in that game. I mean, and he didn't coach a great game to begin with in that playoff game. I think they were actually better last season than people realized. They did go 8-8. I do think losing Fangio hurt on their defense, but also losing Hicks, him going down for the year, that really hurt. I mean, having a Pro Bowl defensive tackle who really helps open up things for Mac. I mean, that's kind of what their defense was built around. That going down really does hurt as well. But as a whole, I think that he's good enough to be, I believe, but just outside. I'm bad at math. Either just outside the top 10 or just barely in it.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. I actually had him right on the money here at 21.
Okay.
He's one of the couple guys that I didn't really know where to rank. I feel like, the offense took a major step back last year. And I think a lot of that was personnel. And like you said, the leadership, you come into question, blaming your kicker for an entire playoff loss, like you
Right.
said, is tough. But yeah, I just think that going back, he was that offensive guy. He wasn't able to make Mitch Trubisky work, whether that's his fault or it's just Trubisky's talent overall. It's probably Trubisky's talent overall, but at the same time, he was brought in to develop this guy and he didn't. I was actually looking at it too, because just going through the rankings, obviously we had 5 new coaches coming this season. I was trying to count and tab guys who I think could be on the way out, whether during the season or after the season. And this was actually one of the first guys I tabbed as could be out next season. I think it'd be an end of the season kind of firing, but I do think this is kind of a prove year for him where this offense has to show some sort of progression this next season.
Yeah, I mean, listen, there was some talk about him being out after last season, which is crazy to think that a guy who was, coach of the year in his first season could have been fired in his second year, but there was some talk about it. And yeah, I mean, I'm someone who I feel like he did a lot. He did so much well that first season and getting Trubisky to have some sort of success. But at the end of the day, I don't know how much I really want to blame a guy for not being able to be successful with Mitchell Trubisky as a quarterback. I mean, it's hard to really put that much blame on him. I don't know. I think that he was, I don't know. It's hard to really. Again, he's a wild card. I'm with you. I could see him easily being gone next year, but I like the spot for him.
Yeah, I think it all just depends. Like, if this team's 6-10 next year, I don't see him coming back.
Yeah.
If this team's just struggling to score points again next year, I don't see him coming back. I just think he's tough. The 2 years I feel like were such a huge variance between year 1 and year 2. That I think year 3 is going to be a huge deciding factor. Is he closer to the year 1 guy or is he closer to the year 2 guy?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that, again, there were some moments last year. I think this could have been a playoff team if he was a perfect coach. Now, it's not fair to say that, you have to be a perfect coach, but it definitely could have. I also do wonder if this Khalil Mack trade in hindsight was just a misevaluation of their talent and not realizing that they were, more than one player away. It's hurting them because they don't have these first round picks. They have to trade for Nick Foles. I don't know if Foles is going to be that much better just because I don't think this is the right situation for him. But we'll see. He's definitely someone who could be good next year. We'll go on to number 24 now. Who do you have here?
So this one I have Cliff Kingsbury. I think a lot of last season he spent a lot of times really kind of tinkering with the offense, obviously making that leap from college to pros. I think he was trying to figure a lot of things out. And, there was times where it's like, are we going run heavy? Are we going to pass the ball a whole bunch? Are we just going to let Kyler go loose? And it was just they still ranked 13 overall in offensive DVOA. He's clearly good on that side of the ball. He's proven, he's going to be that good of a play caller. I already said that this kind of feels like the candidate to be the 2019 Browns in 2020. I do think that they brought in some really flashy pieces, some pieces that look great. But I also think that there's some pieces missing here in terms of in the trenches, the little things that make a good team really good and make a good team great. I think they're still lacking a lot of that. But I think for this offense to be successful, you're going to see a lot of RPOs. Kenyon Drake and Kyler Murray are going to go through the RPO a lot, and then they're going to use those really super talented receivers in Hopkins and Fitzgerald. And I think it's going to be a solid team, but I don't think they're going to go anywhere. I don't think this is going to be a 10-6 team. I think it's going in the right direction. And I still feel like this is a team that's a year away, but I like Kingsbury and what he's done.
Yeah, I think the real question with Kingsbury will he still be able to be successful without David Johnson?
Yeah, I mean, losing that big time running back.
Yes, very little return back. Weird trade from them. No, but yeah, I like Kingsbury as well. I like what he did on offense. I think that with a rookie quarterback as well, they were able to have a good amount of success. Obviously, they've worked together in the past, but even with that, I think one of the problems I have with the Cardinals is their defense was not good last year. I know he's the offensive minded head coach, but you're a head coach now. You have to work on everything. So we'll have to see. I'm with you. I think they're at least a year away. I don't think they're going to be a playoff team next year. Could be wrong, but that's just my gut feeling. But yeah, I like Kingsbury as well. I had him at number 23 on my board. He goes here at number 24. And so now for my number 25 pick, it is the first coach that we have not seen coach an NFL game yet. I'm going Matt Rule here with the number
Yes.
25 overall pick. Number 24. You said yes as you.
Yeah, we agree on this one. I have him right at 25 too.
Gotcha.
This is
Yeah.
perfect. We're in sync here.
There we go. Yeah, I mean, he's again with these new guys. I think that it's hard to really put them too high because we haven't seen them at all. I talk about, I have to see it. We literally haven't seen anything from these new guys other than what they've done in the past, and not in NFL programs. But what he's done in college, it's really hard to go against his resume. He probably was the best. Again, I talk about Fangio being one of the most accomplished guys without getting a head coaching job to get a head coaching job. Well, he's pretty much the ideal guy out of college to go to the NFL and try to have success.
Yeah, so obviously I had that hype for Flores earlier. I feel like if I were going to pick a new head coach to have that kind of hype on next year, where I could see him jump way in my rankings, it's going to be Matt Rule. I just think basically what I felt like in college, watching him through college, through the college ranks, he was a really good X's and O guy. I think he was actually a really great X's and O guy at Baylor, and he was a really great developmental guy. And I think he turned around that Baylor program really quickly by doing that. He did it without recruiting 4 or 5-star talent. He was recruiting guys who were just really big guys who were 3-star players, and then developing them into really good football players. So if you look at what he does, and obviously he's more of a defensive guy too with that, it makes sense their draft. They're going with a lot of athletes on that defense, and this defense is going to be built from the ground up. He's going to build this defense from the ground up, and they're going to be competitive. He's going to get them to compete and fight. And then offense, he brings in Joe Brady, who, he had a pretty good year at LSU as their passing game coordinator.
Yeah, it worked okay for him.
Yeah, and he deployed Clyde Edwards-Helaire really effectively, and I think they're both going to have fun deploying Christian McCaffrey in that same sort of regard, who's just going to be like Clyde Edwards-Helaire on crack, especially for that position. But I do have him at 25 too because I think this team's going to be bad. I just think I've said it before. This team looks like full rebuild mode for me. This roster looks like one of the worst in football to me, and they have to play Drew Brees, Tom Brady, Matt Ryan 6 times.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if I'm as low on them, but I definitely not too high on them. I think really what's going to come down to is their defense. I think their offense they'll probably be able to find some ways to get some points. Question is going to be, are they going to have to score 40 a game to win some games? But we'll move on now. You pretty much covered it all there. I don't have too much else to add there. We'll move on to number 26. Who do you got?
All right, so this is, like I said, I kept a lot of the new coaches and the one-year coaches. So I have then, of course, a couple guys here that I think these are my guys that are probably on the way out. And then sprinkled in a couple new coaches and the one-year guys that I want to see prove it a little more. My first guy on the way out is Dan Quinn. In my book, he's on the way out. I just think he was the worst head coach that's been long tenured last year. And it was pretty shocking to me that even though they turned it around in the second half, that he still has a job. They're still 23rd in points allowed and 20th in defensive DVOA, which is a guy who, this is a guy who was a defensive guru, and this team's giving up 4 points. They gave up a score on 43% of their defensive possessions, which was the second highest in the league. And I just don't think they were very good. And despite some of the injuries that they deal with, that was just bad. And I think the offense has clearly taken steps back since Shanahan left. Shanahan was the guru on that end. And I think that, while they're still effective and still pretty good, I think the offense has moved backwards. And I don't see this working. I just don't see this getting better. He's not if you're a defensive guy who can't coach defense, a good defense, then what are you doing?
Right. Right. No, I'm with you. I mean, the defense was tough to watch at times last season. I had him way lower. I had him at number 29. He was my third worst or fourth worst coach in the NFL. I think he's someone that it does isn't. I don't think he coaches another 16 games in the NFL. I think that he doesn't make it a full season. That's just my opinion. We'll move on to number 27 though. I'm going to have another new guy. I'm going to have Kevin Stefanski here at number 27. I think that, again, someone who is completely unproven, but I actually think that he was underrated in what he did with the Minnesota Vikings. I hear people keep talking about how, the Vikings did so much wrong. And listen, there were things that were wrong. I mean, like the constant pitches at the goal line. I get it. That's frustrating. But at the same time, there's a reason why Dalvin Cook had a breakout season, and part of it is because of Stefanski. I think that I think what he was able to do there, I think he'll be very good for Minnesota or for
Yeah,
Cleveland.
yeah, I think I said Rule is my candidate to be this year's Flores. I think
Hmm.
Stefanski is the candidate to be this year's LaFleur. Um,
Okay.
I think he's a really good fit for Cleveland.
Hmm.
I think they upgraded their offensive line, which is going to be huge. Excuse me. And
Hmm.
I just think his offense translates really well into what Cleveland's personnel does. I think you're going to see a lot of Nick Chubb this year, which I think is something that is going to be really important for that team.
Hmm.
And then Baker's going to use the play actions, and he's going to have Odell Beckham, Jarvis Landry, Austin Hooper, which is a pretty good receiving core to have at a play action.
Yeah.
Um, I did think, if you look at an NFL team from the three-course meal standpoint, I feel like a lot of what the Browns had last year was a bunch of dessert, a lot of pieces that look really nice and are really sweet. They were
Hmm.
missing a lot of, the trenches. They were missing offensive tackles. They were missing a lot of things, the little things that make a good team great, like I was talking about with the Cardinals.
Hmm.
They've addressed those needs. They brought in a good football coach rather than a position coach in a head coach role. So I think this could be a huge leap year for the Browns. And I honestly think this could be a 12-win team. I don't see this roster really that far off. I could see them competing with Baltimore for division title.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about quite about 12 wins, but I definitely think they're going to be better. I think they could contend for a playoff spot if things go well. I like Stefanski. I think that I think that he could be well. Again, hard to really know. We haven't seen too much from him, but I still feel like seeing nothing is still better than the five of the guys that I had lower than him. Actually, well, six guys total, but another one we haven't seen anything from. So that's where I have him. Now we're on number 28. Who do you have as number 28?
Yeah, so I've nailed these picks the last three in terms of my rankings. 28 is my second guy on my list for first coach fired. Obviously, Dan Quinn was on my list as the first guy, or fourth likely to be fired. Number three now is Adam Gase. Quarterback
Mhm.
guru Adam Gase
Mhm.
hasn't really developed a lot in his first year.
Right.
The offensive line was a problem. They couldn't
Mhm.
block for Darnold. They couldn't
Mhm.
create any holes for Bell, and he'll probably get another year or two maybe to prove himself. But I just think that, for an offensive guy and a quarterback guru, it didn't get good. It didn't go well for the Jets. And then Ryan Tannehill, Kenyon Drake, and Devontae Parker all had career years in their first
Yeah.
year without him.
Mhm.
So it's really
Yeah.
hard to justify anything that he did. They were
Mhm.
31st in DVOA and points scored, which is, that's very bad. In case
Mhm.
my analysis is that's bad. Um, we'll see what happens, and maybe the offensive line additions will help. But overall, I just don't see this going very well.
Yeah, they added what they also got Denzel Mims, wide receiver. I think that he could actually be very good for them. I think that was a good pick by him. But as a whole, I'm with you, and he's 28 on my board. So I have him actually dead on in terms of what our rankings are. But my like the thing about it is like part of me feels like how we have to. It's hard to totally rank him just because it's like again the Jets just had no talent on offense. I mean, it was Sam Darnold and Robbie Anderson and then Le'Veon Bell, and that's it. And they're just going to try to, that's not exactly the killer bees there, and definitely don't have the talent. Definitely don't have the great offensive line either. So I just don't think that he's had the tools. But I'm not too high on him, and he has had enough chances now. What he did in Miami wasn't great. Everyone, all the Jets fans were very annoyed that he got hired. I don't think he's terrible, but I think he's just the kind of guy where it's like, what are you doing with him as a head coach? Like, what are you going to accomplish?
Yeah, I think that's kind of the general feeling is that he wasn't really qualified to be the Miami coach. He wasn't really.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed like he was in over his head when he got fired. and then he wasn't really qualified somehow to be the Jets coach, and he still got the job. Um,
Yeah.
I question how much Bell has left in the tank, and obviously, it sounded
Mhm.
like if I remember correctly, that he wasn't really happy that he even showed up to the team, that they signed
Mhm.
him. But there was also a lot of times where they were running the ball up the middle, and he's essentially going horizontal immediately because there's nothing there.
Right.
You
Mhm.
know, and if there's nothing there, there's nothing. You can have you can have Barry Sanders, and that's
Yeah.
just not going to work. So,
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, there were so many plays just got blown up before he even had a chance. I think again, Bell's another one of those guys. I don't give any criticism for what he was able to do, what he did last season, just because they could not block for him whatsoever. Yeah, New York's just the Jets are just kind of a mess on offense, and we'll have to hope that they can finally turn things around.
we don't have to
Uh,
hope. It's okay.
yeah, whatever. I mean, who cares? Yeah, moving on to number 28 or 29.
29.
29. I'm gonna go three in a row here. I'm gonna go with the last uh, coach that has not we have not seen do anything. I'm gonna go Joe Judge simply
Okay.
because he's not the other guys that were lower.
That's
That's
fair.
my reasoning. I mean, what do we talk about? There's not too much to talk about with Joe Judge. It's just I don't I think that Dan Quinn, Adam Gase, and the other three I'd rather have an unknown than those guys.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. I'm with you on
Mhm.
that. I mean, I actually had him at 32 because he was
Mhm.
the one new coach that it's like, okay, what do we take from this guy to like build?
Right.
I mean,
Uh,
I guess the one thing he has going for him is that, he worked with Saban and Belichick and is probably one of the most hyped, high-rosing profile coaches in a while.
mhm.
He caught a lot of flack because he wasn't Eric Bieniemy, and I think a lot of that was overblown because obviously he knocked out the interview portion, which was important. But you could easily make the argument that Eric Bieniemy deserved an opportunity. That's a whole different podcast conversation. Um, I do know at least overall about him. New England special teams. He was a special teams coordinator for 5 years.
Mhm.
The last 2 years, they didn't rank in the top 10 in special teams DVOA. I know
Hmm.
last year was probably a lot because of the kicking issues and Gutskowski
That's
getting
true.
hurt. But the
Yeah.
3 years before that, they were in the top 10. And then last year,
Mhm.
he also, not only as a special teams coordinator, he took on the wide receiving coach role. And I could go on a whole hour and a half on
Right.
the New England Patriots wide receivers
Mhm.
last year if you really want me to, but I don't have to. But, he's a rising guy in terms of coaching profile. So we'll see. Yeah, this is one of the guys, like you said, he's not the other guys, which is fair.
Yeah. Right. And yeah. I believe next week we're going to do you doing an hour and a half on just the Patriots wide receivers. I believe that's what we're doing. No, but yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that with the special teams thing, one thing about the Patriots that's actually a little bit surprising because I feel like I've seen so many great plays on special teams from the Patriots. Like that seems like no team has more blocked punt touchdowns than the Patriots.
Yeah.
Recently. So I do think that there is something there. And I mean, what's going to get brought up is just John Harbaugh was a special teams coach. So, there is some proven success there. But anyways, we have three head coaches left. Which one which one is your favorite out of the three that we have remaining?
So my favorite out of the three, I guess, is the guy that this is another guy that I kind of feel like gets a mulligan. I'll go with Zach Taylor here because he's not the
Okay.
other two guy who are my two most likely to get fired.
Hmm.
Um, so I don't know. Like I don't
Yeah.
I don't think the Bengals were good last year, but I also don't think they were the worst team in the league roster wise. I
Hmm.
guess is my opinion. I
Yeah.
feel like he was really desperate to get out of the Andy Dalton situation, even when it didn't really seem necessary. And I don't
Hmm.
really know what he saw in Ryan Finley that was like, wow, I need to get this guy at quarterback right now. But that
Uh-huh.
clearly didn't work because they're already on Joe Burrow. Um,
Right.
I don't think he did his team any favors, but I also think that he's getting more of the guys that he wants now this next season. So I'll give him a mulligan and say it's basically a first year for him. He got the job for being Sean McVay's guy. We'll see if he can develop.
Yeah, he gets a mulligan by only going 30th out of the top 32 rankings. But yeah, I mean, I'm at 31. Yeah, I think the Andy Dalton thing was something that soured me on him as well. I'm also with you. I think that they weren't a good team. I don't think Cincinnati was the worst team in the NFL last year. Injuries did play a factor, but I just wonder if there was something coming from there was Ironically, I was about to say I was wondering if there's something coming from upstairs, but apparently there's a dog upstairs or of some sort. But I was just wondering if there's something coming, from like the ownership of like, hey, let's see if we have something else in any of other quarterbacks. But that wasn't great. Again, we'll have to wait and see. But luckily, it's the Bengals, so we will have 15 more years of him, whether he wants it or not.
Yeah, I mean, he's not going anywhere anytime soon.
Yeah.
This is classic Bengals. But I mean, yeah, we'll see how he does now that he has Burrow. He's going to have some weapons around him. It'll be interesting, but I feel like he was, of all the head coaches that even coached just a year, he was the biggest unknown for me. Even some of the guys who are new head coaches, I feel like he was a bigger unknown than them.
Yeah.
That's how weird that Bengals team was
Mhm.
last year.
Yeah, I agree. So we have two coaches left. I'm going to be giving the last odd pick, which will also give you your final pick. Doug Marrone and Matt Patricia are the last two. This is a no-brainer for me. I mean, Matt Patricia is the only coach who has a below 300 win percentage, other than Zach Taylor, who only coached one season. Patricia has been a mess. Marrone, I'm not crazy about him, but he did come very close to going to a Super Bowl. I think a lot of that was, I think some luck factored in there, and I think he was a part of the reason why they didn't end up winning that game. But nevertheless, I do think that he has that going for him, and they haven't necessarily. And I think that I can see more potential with Marrone. I see no potential with Patricia. Marrone goes at number 31 here. Patricia is number 32.
Yeah, I mean that's fair. Like I said, I had Judge 32, and then I had these
Mhm.
guys 30 and 31 back to back,
Uh,
just because Judge was such an unknown.
right.
Marone, the tough thing was just 34% winning percentage since that AFC Championship game, and
Hmm.
you can blame the front office for a lot of the issues that Jacksonville had, but I also feel like he lost control of that locker room on multiple occasions,
Uh,
and I just feel like it lost a little bit of control. And I know they've kind of fire sailed a lot of these guys, but I was just shocked to see that this team had fell. They were 29th in defensive DVOA. And this was right
mhm,
after like everyone was just talking about this defense and how great it was and all that.
mhm,
Fell all the way to 29, just crazy to me that they fell all the way that far back. And I think what Miles Jack is essentially the only guy left. We're
uh-huh,
both pretty high on Minshew, so maybe him and DJ Shark figure some things out. But I
mhm.
think they need to take a major step forward in development to save his job.
Yeah, I mean, if it was up to me, I would have gotten rid of Marone last year. They kept him. They're going to give him one more chance. We'll see how it works out. Hopefully for them, it does work out. But again, uh, I had him at number 30. I had Zach Taylor lower. You had Judge lower. But what we can all agree on is that, even the 34 win percentage would have been higher than Matt Patricia's win percentage over, what he's done for Detroit. He's been a mess, and I can't see him not being a mess next season. I just can't see it.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't see it lasting very long at this point. He's on his way out. He's my second candidate for first coach fired. Obviously, we're going to talk about Patricia here. So
Yeah, no, yeah. I mean, right. I mean, I don't have too much to say about Marone. Again, he's kind of just one of those whatever coaches. I feel like, but Patricia, I have plenty to say. But yeah. I mean, nothing he does seems to work, and it seems like instead of saying, okay, this isn't working, let's try something else, he's doubling down. The defensive line was supposed to be very good last year. It was one of the worst in football, if not the worst. It seems like everybody around. Yes, you can make the argument that, hey, when Stafford got hurt, that's when they really bottomed out. But I actually argue the opposite. I think when you lose a quarterback, that's when you can really see how good a head coach is. When Rodgers went down, we can kind of see McCarthy. It's like, this isn't really working out too well. I think when Garoppolo went down, we could see that Shanahan's like, oh, hey, they're still staying competitive in some of these games. This is still a very good, well-coached team. They don't have their quarterback right now. And I think that when Stafford went down, the Lions were just abysmal. And I think that it comes down to coaching at the end of the day. I do think that part of it too is like I don't think that he is, really I try to only talk about what I see in terms of what on tape or in the press conferences. But with all the stories, and I won't repeat any of them, but all the stories that have come out, it seems like he's not a very good locker room guy. So when you're not a good leader, when you're not good and you're not good in X's and O's, I don't really know how you can't be the worst head coach in football.
yeah, I mean, if you set this over under at 10, you may be. I'm inclined almost to take the under for how many games he lasts this next season. I just
Okay.
think he's the first coach
Mhm.
fired.
Yeah.
It was abysmal, and they've doubled down with all these bad contracts now.
Mhm.
And the crazy thing is like before he took over this job, and before last season, even you could put all these rosters up and just put a blank slate on them and just rank the coaching positions based on team rosters. I don't
Mhm.
necessarily think the Lions are like a bottom 10 job. I
Yeah.
don't think they were in any means, and it's just become a bottom 10 job because nobody likes playing there and nobody likes playing with him at this point. And it's
Mhm.
just become a bad situation. Hashtag free Matt Stafford should just be trending every weekend.
Right. Yeah, and I'm with you. I mean, I feel like the Lions are pretty like I think their team is good. I think they have a talented roster. And I think that's maybe the only way that Patricia could end up, having some success is just if the talent just overrides the coaching.
I just think that the talent will succeed when there's a coach in place.
Hmm.
And they don't have a coach in place, not a real coach. So that's going to have to change before they find success.
Yeah, and again, I know people are going to bring up they were undefeated through 4 weeks, 3-0-1, but at the end of the day, one of the losses was tying the Cardinals. I think that was more, and they beat the Chargers. They had some moments, but as a whole, I don't know how anyone could still really look up to Patricia at this point, even if what everything in the media has been untrue. If you're a new guy coming in there, I don't get how you don't have negative thoughts in your mind heading in. So again,
Yeah.
we'll see. I know Luke G, who will be posting a video either today or tomorrow on this channel. He's a big Lions fan. Hope for him that the Lions do turn it around, but I just think they're at least 1 year away because they need to get rid of their coach.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I do think that, yeah, like I said, first coach fired. I can't really say anything else other than that. He's going to be the first coach fired. I just
Yeah.
don't think there's nothing about him that I've seen that's like, oh, this guy's going to fix things. He's going to figure things out. I just think he's way in over his head in terms of that job, which I felt like I could have said when he was a defensive coordinator at the Patriots, but
Mhm.
that's a different story.
Yeah, it really does seem like he's gotten a great career in the NFL due to being friends with Bill Belichick.
Yeah, it really is. So,
Mhm. So, Bill Belichick, if you're looking for a new friend, hit me up. But until next time, I think that'll end it for this podcast. Kyle, do you have any closing thoughts?
really interesting coaching list. I don't think we were really that far off as we expected. Obviously, there's a couple with like Vic Fangio and others.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I do think that it's kind of interesting. I feel like there's a lot of good head coaches in the league now. There's more
Mm,
than I kind of anticipated because I always feel like there's 10 really good head coaches that I think make a difference in a football team, and I
mhm.
generally feel that way every year. But I feel like there's a lot more better head coaches than I thought and anticipated. That a few of these guys are pretty darn good.
Yeah, there's guys that are going in the 20s that I like. Definitely a lot of in like 20s that I think that could, people that are going in 20s I think could end up winning Coach of the Year next year. Like I think it's that much variance. Yeah, I think the Fangio was the uh biggest gap, but with 10 spots. But as a whole, we tended to be pretty right along there. I thought you were going to have Bill O'Brien like at the worst, and I was going to be looked like an idiot for having him that high. So I'm glad that it turned out to not be that bad.
Yeah, I mean, I you do have to separate for the you do have to separate the executive from the head coach. And he
Yeah.
just continues to get results even though I disagree with some of the results.
Hmm.
He does get there and he does get wins no matter
Yeah.
what it means.
Win
So,
the division. Playoffs a little bit different story, but still, I had him only like 7 spots higher than you, so not too bad there. But yeah, so everyone watching or listening, if you're listening, thanks for watching or listening. Appreciate it, and we will see you next time.
peace.